Chapter 74. Usury and Charity. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 19 and 20. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brothers, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to in the land whither thou goest to possess it. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 19 and 20. This is a summary of what was stated in some detail in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 1 to 11. In brief, we are told in these two texts that loans to fellow believers in need must be without interest of any kind, either in money, food, or anything else. A loan to an alien, a non-believer, can be upon interest. We need to consider this repetition. Men are not inclined to be charitable with their money. This means that they isolate themselves and they think only of their own interests. God strikes at this isolation by telling his covenant people to be generous with non-interest-bearing loans to their needy fellow covenant members. The premise of such a law is covenantal. It presupposes a community of faith and life wherein men are indeed members one of another. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25. In the pre-World War II era, there were many problems, conflicts and tensions in rural America, but there was also some sense of community. Farm equipment was loaned back and forth since the poorer farmers could not afford to buy all the needed horse-drawn equipment. For emergency situations, neighbours would help. Such neighbourliness still persists in some areas, but in others it's gone. It's interesting that James Hastings's editor, Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, has no entry for community, although there is a long one on communism and one on the community of goods. The same is true in various biblical encyclopedias. The Encyclopedia Judaica has an excellent historical survey of the subject, but no biblical commentary or analysis. There's a reason for this. Community is a religious fact and not a coerced condition. Community requires a common and governing faith. Too often we see men having a common faith, which is, however, not a governing and determining factor in their lives. In the United States of the 1990s, well over 90% believe in God. And most of these regard themselves as, in some sense, Christian, but only a small minority of these are rigorously governed by their faith. It's one thing to believe that God is real, even as the moon and the stars are real, but quite another to be totally governed by God and his law word. The first is a belief, and the second a governing faith. Covenantal thinking sees us as members one to another. Non-covenantal thinking restricts our religion to some kind of relationship to God, whereas covenantal thinking sees our relationship to God as one with a membership in a covenant community. This cannot be limited to or confused with church membership. Communities have laws, and God's law governs the faith or covenant community. One aspect of this law concerns usury. Usury in the modern sense is excessive interest. In the biblical sense, it means any interest, whether disguised or open. The prohibition has as its purpose to prevent covenantal, community assistance from becoming commercial and a source of profit. It must be charity to a needy brother, not a business loan. It's interesting that the Jewish toleration for usury began during the Babylonian captivity. Since then, a vast network of evasion has been developed, such as lending money to a Gentile to be reloaned to a Jew in order to collect interest. Partnerships were formed whose purpose was to lend money on interest under the pretext that the borrower managed the business and shared the profits. In AD 1179, the medieval church forbade the taking of interest from a fellow believer. This rule meant that Jews became thereby the moneylenders to Christians. This made the loans legal for both Christians and Jews. The Reformation inherited the medieval view, but it also studied texts such as Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 7 and 8, chapter 23, verses 19 and 20, Leviticus chapter 25, verses 35 to 37, Psalm 15, verse 5, Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 8, and Luke chapter 6, verse 35, without an Aristotelian perspective. Calvin wrote with respect to usury, "Here an objection is made that today also usury shall not be permitted to us for the same reason it was forbidden the Jews, because there is a fraternal union among us. To that I reply, there is some difference in the political union, for the situation in which God placed the Jews and many other circumstances made it possible for them to trade conveniently among themselves without usury. Our union is not at all the same. Therefore, I do not concede that it is forbidden us simply as long as it is not contrary to equity or to charity. The society we live in is not identical with the covenant community of believers, where charity must prevail. If the commercial loans are not contrary to equity or to charity, they are permitted. Heinrich Bullinger in 1530 had already set forth new views on the subject. With reference to Luke chapter 6, verses 34 and 35, Bullinger saw this as referring to help to a neighbour and not a commercial loan. The requirements of love for one's neighbour still govern such things. With this in mind, we can understand the meaning of this law. First, the society of the believers is a covenant community. In that community, our relations must be godly and neighbourly. This means dealing with one another honestly and lawfully. Some, but by no means all such relationships, must of necessity be charitable. In such dealings, we must be just and law-abiding, but the need for charity is not universal. The covenant community will be exploited if its only law, or governing law, is charity. During the centuries-long history of the Jews, the beggar has been a constant exploiting person in the Jewish community. Second, this law militates against isolation, against an anarchistic individualism. Sadly, one of the appeals in this century of the city has been its facelessness. I have heard many people over the years express their delights in the anonymity of urban life. I recall in a Bay community, retired people building homes designed to make it impossible for their children or grandchildren to visit them overnight because there were no guest rooms. The era of individualism is hostile to family and to community responsibilities, and this law forbids such a way of life. Third, loans to aliens, rich or poor, are legal. The lack of faith in the God of Scripture leaves them without community as a willful choice. The pagan community can be severely restrictive, and it is not a loving but a coercive life. Being isolated from the living God, they are isolated one from another. True charity is a two-way street. The giver recognizes the need and his brother, and his help is an act of covenant grace. The recipient knows that God governs the giver and the gifts. In this case, the interest-free loan, and his response is marked by gratitude and grace. Various Christian groups and churches now have loan funds to help the needy in their circles with an interest-free loan. Such funds represent a true application of this law, whose purpose is not to create exploiters, but a covenant community. We must take note, finally, of a modern form of usury, which is also a hidden tax, namely inflation. Inflation robs every man of a percentage of his monetary wealth. It is a form of hidden interest on every dollar he possesses. The modern states may have usury laws, borrowing interest they regard as exorbitant to private businesses and persons, but their hidden tax, inflation, can reach vast figures without any sense of guilt on the state's part.